passages into other realms and possible spaces of inhabitation. Welcome to another episode of Mindful Drawing. This is Rooks is Fun. Today we will be exploring the depth in space that we can create by leveraging some of the basic techniques of one-point perspective drawing as an abstract and generative device. If you're new to any kind of perspective construction or representational drawing that builds upon the techniques established for the several hundred years, don't worry if things look a little funny. Things might be stretched or pinched, distorted or twisted. If things don't line up, follow with it. See where it goes. You might find that with the continued addition of parallel, horizontal, and vertical lines, by gradually shifting the convergence and divergence of our perspective lines, you'll begin to see possible worlds. And drawing through the awkwardness, drawing through the discomfort, or the strangeness of our misalignments, especially when we don't go deeply step by step through the technique, is an opportunity to bring attention to how that works and how we perceive through this flat two-dimensional medium something of depth. So leverage that awkwardness and uncertainty, relish in the opportunity to play and experiment, and imagine what worlds will emerge as we collide multiple perspectives together and extend one passage into another. The drawings here in this mindful practice are meant as a guidance for opening up, for a releasing into the page, and hopefully an extending of creativity out into a medium that we can begin to see ourselves in and imagine new worlds within, as that powerful expression of drawing lets us create new things with just that pencil and paper coming together. And all you need for today is any blank sheet of paper, a pencil or pen, something to draw with, some surface to draw on to keep it stable, and the rest is a following along, a listening, and then a releasing into what you find as you deploy some of the techniques we begin with and leverage our breathing, our body position, and our attention to the details of that experience. Grab your pen or pencil, piece of paper, and let's draw together. And a simple sketch way to start thinking about it on a warm-up piece is that if we make some kind of X pattern or butterfly pattern, whether that's symmetrical or two V's coming together at different angles, we can think of that as a setup where all of our vertical and horizontal lines can work their way around the X and generally begin to establish a plane that we will perceive in space. And we can either draw out from the corners to start to think of those planes maybe becoming more of walls or something bounding a space. Or if we draw in, similarly, they can work back further into the drawing just to make more layers of these potential framing devices that we see spatially because of the trick to our eye. And the, specifics of the technique work out from that vanishing point. But from this, we can also kind of take some abstraction ideas of shape, this kind of trapezoidal corner side condition that works its way in and back out again along some lines. And if we allow a little flexibility in the perfection of our perspective kind of projection, we can begin to just draw with the kind of extracted elements of that framing of a view and allow them to be a little softer to some degree. But I think as we draw, whichever feels accessible to you, if you prefer the non-distorted, you can always begin with a bit of a light X and then bring those converging lines together into that framing device, or just draw some kind of open trapezoids converging towards each other. But for the warm-up, I just want to establish what I'll generally be kind of talking through. I'll probably work more in this kind of open system range, just to begin to make some potential visual dives into space with something that's not so overly constrained or constructed. So beginning anywhere on a fresh page, I'm just going to start by kind of drawing a diagonal line in towards the center, and at some point taking a breath and trying to bring it vertically down towards myself. And again, as that breath kind of eases out, then heading diagonal in a kind of mirrored position to the original line for a while. And then some distance between mirroring that shape, perhaps following in the same footsteps of breathing in towards the convergence of the trapezoids. Breathing down, drawing towards the self. And then breathing back out again in the divergence. And the distance we play between these open shapes will affect the perception of the space, but we can choose any new location and just begin the same construction as a place to use this simple, repetitive act of drawing to let our eyes start to see and potentially imagine into the space. As we may draw more of these, and they might intersect or overlap, you can make the choice to keep the lines going and cross, or stop whenever they hit another line. Whichever you can bring your attention to, and allow that openness to just draw with some awareness to where a decision has been made and can work itself through the drawing. And again, if the strangeness that might emerge from these perspectives, the compression or expansion of space with a bit of distortion, bring some discomfort or unease to the perception, feel free to begin each mark, perhaps lightly, with just that X across the page, and use that as the guide for breathing through that open trapezoid, extending towards the convergence, and then letting a breath out smoothly as the shapes diverge again. Primarily what it might be affecting is the actual position of these planes in space. If we were to work through the techniques of projection to begin to find them, we would have some strangeness in height or location if the points don't converge to the same, or the lines don't converge to the same point, but they still set up a nice framework for maybe beginning some other explorations as we can draw into these potential spaces. Once we've established a few here on the page, and because they begin to suggest something of walls, something around us in space, we could begin to consider how those connect, perhaps with an arch or a vault, perhaps with a straight line as a ceiling or a floor, and spending some time with each one, playing with ways it might connect to its neighbor, perhaps a consistent exploration, or just some play and variation, a pitch, a shape or a curve, a slant or a straight line, and seeing how they might begin to frame some of that potential perspective space. By keying in that picture plane or focus of the perspective. Each bit that we add lets our eyes inhabit a bit more of the space of the drawing in something we might be kind of used to seeing in photographs and other perspectival drawings. And then from that back plane that's happening there, we could begin to draw stuff forward into the page, perhaps starting at the peak or center of one of the crossings and drawing vertically out from there to extend off the edge, and then in generally even increments, gradual change, we can work our way around the curve or along the line to fan out from that vanishing point and extend into the space of the page. Without the X marking the center, we'll likely have some variation or distortion from a kind of correct correct projection, but then we also will have enough to begin to perceive some of those logics that we're used to in perspective. Starting to frame little passages, places of moving, perhaps even suggesting, hinting at space back beyond where one wall or plane ends and another might begin. Practicing radiating those rays outwards, start to describe the extension of shape into depth. And fill up a little space on the page, providing a medium for our imagination to begin to look into. And each moment allows us to experiment a bit in that space of distortion. Any perspective playing a game already of distortion, as these techniques imitate our experience of vision and bringing some awareness to how we see that depth of space, how it might feel accurate to our perception, or perhaps feel quite squished, stretched, or a little bit warped. And as we navigate around the page, we can look for other ways to bring some of that depth, perhaps working in the floor condition in a similar way, lightly radiating these fanning, extensions from the back plane, pulling towards ourselves to establish that surface of the ground, drawing horizontal lines gradually from the back corner with slightly expanding spacing to begin to define a bit of a grid that might suggest the shrinking or converging of space back from our position of viewing. These different moments of passage and of colliding, interfering, and merging together into some new hybrid space. And at any time, if things become too dense or we've run out of places to continue to draw lines and explore the existing passages, we can always draw a new background, convergence, bringing those open trapezoids together around a space. Perhaps playing a bit with its shape, whether it maintains vertical, parallel conditions, or takes on some degree of slant or reorientation. Could even go fully horizontal. Well, let's just try a little pitched wall condition. Fun. Building on the established workings of a technique that we are accustomed to seeing and letting it unfold at its own pace. Perhaps as a bit of practice in drawing with depth, or as a new experience of letting go of some of the constrictions necessary for the more accurate constructions to have believability in experience and representation. Here, being a little more open to a squishy space, a soft space for working back into. And we can now, with a bit of world setup, choose the path to continue extending planes of ceiling and floor, planes of wall or boundary, and start to think about how we might develop little worlds in each passage's potential by drawing lines parallel to things in the rough vertical or horizontal, or lines divergent from the extensions of the trapezoid. We could begin to frame things like a window or a door, and seeing how it works out in the multitude of spaces. Some may feel more accurate, others more distorted. Each is just a collection of shapes that our eyes begin to perceive with depth. To bring, say, a side passage or door to one of these, you can draw a vertical line anywhere along the convergent diagonal, and then work towards the perceived vanishing point whether we see it or not. 2, begin to establish that potential hole in a plane. And drawing horizontally back, we can make that a hallway. If it goes further than we can see, or a door if we frame it, perhaps with its own floor coming in, to establish its own material space. And if you have any technique for drawing figures, people, animals, plants, things from the world, they could begin to inhabit some of these spaces as we begin to feel a sense of depth and volume within them. We might find a small silhouette standing there or moving through the space from time to time, whatever they begin to inspire in your vision. Just to let that mind play within what we've created. For some reason, for me, I always see some form of potential stair taking place back here. Just that repetition of horizontals and convergence, sliding off in its own direction, each passage providing its own potential scale to how we might see figure within it, playing with the height relative to that perceived horizon as we share kind of an eye level with the characters that might exist here in the drawing. To sense what we see in space. And in the construction of the one-point perspective, there's a lot of potential for radiation or repetition of things as they generally contract away from our vision and expand towards our vision. So we might find it gives greater structure to any of these spaces to start to take the lines of the wall, the lines of the cap or ceiling space or floor, just begin to let them repeat in a gradually increasing offset. Again, construction techniques for perspective can build this all up in an accurate representation that can be tracked between drawings of plans and elevations, but we can also approximate it to sketch ideas, to see a space quickly and think of how it may unfold into its neighbor. Perhaps adding some articulation to a wall or a ceiling. And if the technique of any kind of perspective is something new to you, you might find, especially around starting to fill things in, quite a lot of kind of wobbliness, stretch, or distortion. And for a drawing like this, in a practice about play and relaxation, about bringing attention and awareness to both what we see and what we create, you can let that wobble be something fun to inhabit. That distortion of space, a potential opportunity for a new way of seeing, or just find some territory to breathe into that converging, open trapezoid system. And for the next few minutes, choosing a path through the multi-dimensional potential adventures on the page and building out that sequence of convergent conditions. Breathing through each vector, repositioning with attention to how our body reacts, how our breath holds for a moment, how we place the pencil or pen, and we may reposition our hand, our wrist, or our whole arm and body to find access to some of these new spaces of drawing or new orientations. And just to begin to potentially look deeper into what we've created and find opportunity. In the last minute or so, maybe finding one small area just to finish out a little imagining with what we might be able to see now. Just adding something to the walls or to the floors that begin to round out our potential vision of space. And with a few breaths, we can bring our shoulders back into a roll. If we're extending over the page, we can bring our back into position with a little flex side to side, forward and back. And let our hands open and then lightly close a couple of times. Take a step back and let the eyes absorb the worlds clashing or colliding. And take a breath to be at rest with the distortions or clarity that might emerge as this drawing can now pass. Thank you for joining in this practice. I hope you've found some technique there to draw space into the page and out from it, and maybe find something kind of unexpected or interesting in the convergence of all of those potential perspectives. While these techniques can be used to represent ideas about space and organization, they can also be a freeing way to think about the interaction of shapes, of simple procedures and techniques of drawing, to begin to tease out creative opportunities just from a piece of paper. Breathing through the lines, breathing through the construction of the shapes gives us a place to bring our thoughts into convergence with what we're doing, to let our actions draw our attention in, and to practice our mindfulness in a space of also creative expression. I'd love to hear what you've discovered. Perhaps share some images on Twitter @RooksIsFun, or give us a thumbs up here and a comment about what you've found in exploring some of these techniques. If you've enjoyed the practice, please share it with your friends and let me know how things are going for you and anything you would like to explore through this exercise in mindful drawing. I hope your passages take you somewhere interesting. Have a wonderful day. Draw well.